I think you're never ready for the job. And if you are, you're in the wrong job. Do you know what I mean? You're not really challenging yourself. I remember using the words, I'm just not using my brain enough. I need to be doing more. If you're making your bosses look good, if you're making their lives easier, if you're taking things off their plates, not only does it help them, but you're essentially teaching yourself in rapid time. You don't know what you don't know. So bringing a different perspective, I think is always useful. I think people like when you come in with a point of view, right? Here's what I've thought about. I never ask people what their next role is. I always say, what's your next role? I know people use the phrase, be the CEO of your own territory, and that's kind of an overused cliche, but it's quite true, really.
We are live on the Objective Hiring Show today, and we're joined by Ali. Ali, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
It is absolutely our pleasure. And where I'd love to start is just to hear a little bit more about yourself, because I think it helps the audience understand a little bit more about who they're listening to today.
Yeah, absolutely. So thanks for the introduction. My name is Alle Prestipino. I have been with a company called SAP for the last 11 plus years. I actually recently just decided to take a bit of a break and a bit of a sabbatical. But my former role was the Chief Operating Officer for Asia Pacific Japan with SAP SuccessFactors, which is our HR suite within SAP. So very exciting space to be in, obviously very topical as we go into this new world of AI and hiring and skills and reskilling. So really excited to be here today to chat to you a little bit about my experience and hear yours as well.
Yeah, that's an awesome introduction. And a great place to start would be your career, I think, because you rose through the ranks quite meteorically, I'd say. And I'd love to hear a little bit more about how you managed to achieve that.
Yeah, absolutely. So a bit of an interesting story. So was starting with SAP when I was still finishing my university degrees. I was studying law and business, assuming I'd become a lawyer. Started in SAP. I come from a tech family, so that kind of seemed like a natural place to start my career and get some exposure. Essentially got distracted by the shiny lights of software sales and decided to pursue that instead of law. I did the SAP Sales Academy, which is a really world-class program, and I was lucky enough to do that in California. I then was back in Sydney doing my sales career for a number of years across all the SAP solutions, which was obviously really eye-opening to see how much there was to sell and how we could help customers. And I was working within the public sector space specifically. And then in 2020, not planned well, but me and my husband decided to move to Singapore during the middle of a pandemic. We didn't know that at the time. And that's when I made my jump with SuccessFactors and came over and started to do a number of roles. While I was with SuccessFactors, I was exposed to sides outside of sales. So I was really working closely with the COO and the president and working on the strategic initiatives, strategic objectives for how we grow the Asia Pacific Japan business. And it was something that I just honestly fell in love with. And I just kept asking for more work. I kept asking to get deeper entrenched. I was able to create a role, head of strategic initiatives, where I was working across all market units. So India, ANZ, Southeast Asia, Japan, and Korea. And it was essentially the training to become the COO when I got the call. The call was earlier than I expected in my career, to be completely honest. But I was lucky that had the training and had the mentorship, and then there we were for the last 18 months, been in the COO seat.
Is it the sort of thing where, in a sense, you're never quite ready for it, but when you got it was as good a time as any?
Exactly. I think you're never ready for the job, and if you are, you're in the wrong job. Do you know what I mean? You're not really challenging yourself. So, of course, there was learning curves, and there's one thing to kind of work alongside someone doing the role, and then having to do it yourself is a very different experience. But, there's nothing better than kind of getting thrown in the deep end. And if you have the right support system around you, I think, anything's really possible. So, yeah, it was a challenge and the hours were long, but I loved every minute of it. So it was good.
You used a phrase earlier where you said you kind of created something for yourself. I'd love to hear more about that kind of proactive mindset you've had in your career.
Yeah, it's so I don't want to give you the too long of a version, but essentially I was interviewing for a sales role and to be a first line sales leader. And I thought, okay, this is the right next step. Everyone does sales, then you become a sales leader, and that's kind of how you move through the ranks. And I didn't end up getting the job. And I was, thinking, oh gosh, okay, well, what do I do now? And I was speaking with the president and the COO, and I remember using the words, I'm just not using my brain enough. I need to be doing more. So what can I do? And they said, well, tell us what you want to do. So I said, okay, here's what I've realized, I really enjoy doing. Here's where I'm good. Here's where I think I can add value to you. And I think one of the tips and tricks I learned pretty early on in my career was, if you're making your bosses look good, if you're making their lives easier, if you're taking things off their plates, not only does it help them, but you're essentially teaching yourself in rapid time. So, hey, don't worry about that. Let me do it for you. And I got to learn even faster than I normally would. So I, created a job spec and I told them this is where I think I can add value. I see a gap in the roles at the moment. You don't have anyone doing these things. If you really want to propel us to the next level, here's how I think we can get there. And they said, okay. And there you go. So sometimes just seeing those opportunities, and I kind of just went for it. And I was lucky enough I had the support to do that. Of course, it's not always that easy, especially in times of headcount restrictions and whatnot. But yeah, I was lucky enough to be able to create that opportunity.
I'm wondering if you would take the same mindset now external trying to go into a company. Is it also having that kind of high empathy for the person trying to think how you can solve a problem for someone in particular and kind of carving out your own idea of a role? Is that also the way you're thinking about it?
Yeah, I think yeah, I haven't thought about it as much externally, but I think that's the right approach because sometimes you don't know what you don't know. So bringing a different perspective, I think is always useful. So, being able to go externally and say, hey, look, this worked really well in my last role. I don't know if it's going to be the exact same. Of course, every, business is different, but here's what I was able to do to create an impact. Do you think it'd be successful there? Or do you think, you have a need for it there? And bringing that, experience alongside of you. Some people say, no, we don't need it. It doesn't really apply to this, type of industry or this type of technology. But it's something I think that you should always kind of have a point of view on. I think people like when you come in with a point of view, right? Here's what I've thought about. Here's where I think you may be able to improve things. Here's where I see some gaps. Here's what other people are doing that you are maybe not doing. And just being able to bring some insight. I think it's always nicer than kind of showing up for an interview being, well, what do you expect for the role? Do you know what I mean?
Yes. And I guess once you get to a certain level of seniority, that mindset would be more expected rather than, let's say, you're an individual contributor, second year in the job, and you're coming in with the agenda. I feel like, yeah, it might not resonate so well.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. You need to be coming in with a very clear point of view of how you would help the business and how you would make it successful. Absolutely.
Yes. Uh, what I'm interested in also is, shifting the gear a little bit now to thinking about hiring into your teams and all the people you've hired. Has your lens or your view over hiring changed as you've gone up the ranks yourself? Like, do you view maybe your bit of the process is different or what you look for is different? And like, how has your view of hiring evolved?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think and again, I maybe have a little bit of a, different perspective because it wasn't that long ago that I was in sales roles and, kind of coming through the different stages. So I think when I'm doing an interview, I probably have a slightly different lens because I do remember what it's like to be on the front line. I do remember the challenges of picking up the phone and speaking to customers. And I'm focusing more on the sales role because that was obviously a really big part of our hiring for the different market units. And just being, I suppose, empathetic, to people trying to interview and showcase their skills. But because I remember very, very clearly kind of what they had to do. So I think, you know, I suppose to use your quote, like coming through the ranks that quickly, I do remember what it's like. So I think when someone's coming to an interview, I also maybe expect a little bit more because I do remember, what it's like to be on the sales side very, very well. So I think, for me, there's definitely the empathy, but coming in very prepared, coming in, with a very clear point of view of, how you think you're going to be successful, where you want to be. I never ask people what their next role is. I always say, what's your next role? Where do you want to get to? Because, everything's a stepping stone. And that's how I treated my last few roles before the COO role. So I really want to understand where people want to get to. And I hate using the 5 years or 10 years time frame. It's more about your next role. And I think that's been helpful to me. I've also had a pretty strong bias to wanting to look external. I think it's really nice. I shouldn't use the word bias, but you know what I mean. Perspective of going external, because I think fresh perspectives are so important. And I think any organization, we sometimes get this is how we've always done it. This is how, X company runs things. And I like to have people come in and challenge my way of thinking, challenge the company's way of thinking. I love hearing what our competitors were doing because, I hated being behind anyone. So if we weren't keeping ahead of things, then we were falling behind. So having people come in from outside the organization as well was something I really advocated for. And it wasn't always, something that was easy to do, but it was something that was important to me.
And this would be people from outside the industry completely, but with transferable skills from another similar business or maybe a completely different business.
Yeah, I mean, I think it would need some level of similarity where you could understand, but I think the learning part was never a deal breaker. Anyone can learn, solutions and understand the technology over enough time. I really looked for things that were more on the characteristic side, to be honest, than having someone who came from technology. Of course, it's nice to have people from, let's say our competitors want to interview with us because that's always a nice set of skills as well and insights. But no, it didn't have to, for me, it was not, you had to come from technology. You had to be a technical person. I did not think that was the most important. And, the hiring methodology that I had, which we might get into a little bit later, was definitely not so much on experience, but it was a lot more on other characteristics.
Well, let's dive into that now then. So yeah, what was your philosophy?
So, and I have to give credit. I stole this from my husband because he's done lots of recruiting in his RVP role for a sales team, and he taught me this years ago. So the methodology is called ICE, ICEE. So it essentially starts with intelligence. So having the EQ, the IQ, those are things you can't necessarily teach. But if someone comes in with a certain degree of IQ and EQ, you're really able to teach them anything. You can teach any tech. You can teach any type of solution. You can teach any sales methodology. So that was kind of, point number one. And the second was coachability. So the C for coachability. Someone who had the right attitude, someone who wanted to be a team player, someone who was open to feedback, someone who wanted to learn new ways of doing things. I mean, if you have that in place, I mean, that's really one of the best things you can get in a new hire. And, so tick, tick, okay, they've got the intelligence, they want to be there, they've got the hunger, they want to be coached. And then entrepreneurship is the first E. So this is kind of an interesting one as well, especially, again, I have my sales hat on, but when you're hiring salespeople, you want that hunger. You want people to want to build their own, empire out of their territory and really be responsible for it. I know people use the phrase, be the CEO of your own territory, and that's kind of an overused cliche, but it's quite true, really. And some of the best hires that, I've seen are people that their first job was door-to-door salesman, or salesperson. And they never forget that rejection. They never forget what it is like to have that rejection over and over and over until they figure out how to make it a yes. And that doesn't go away in people. Those characteristics don't go away. And they make the best salespeople. They make the best hires. So I love asking the question, what was your first job? And, maybe they'll say, oh, McDonald's, like, it's not really relevant. Well, actually, it is. Like you had to learn how to work on a line and work with other people. And maybe you were a manager at 17 of managing other 16 and 17-year-olds. Like that is learning how to be a leader very, very young. So I like asking those questions as well. And then the last D is experience. So this is why I kind of say I don't put experience first, because if you have these other characteristics and then there's experience, great. But the experience part can come later. And I think if you have those other things, it can make up for lack of experience. And I hopefully it may be a bit of an example where experience doesn't always translate or is needed to translate to results. Sorry, that was a long-winded.
No, that's perfect. I love the detail. And for the C, the coachability. So I'm interested in how you'd evaluate that in an interview. Is it almost poking them a little bit, maybe kind of critiquing their approach and just seeing how they respond? Like how did you tease out the coachability?
Yeah, good question. I think it's a lot of the example questions, and then finding kind of drilling down into them. So tell me an example about when you were successful. Okay, fine. But then it's tell me about an example when you weren't successful, and then drilling a bit further and then drilling a bit further. And then, if you hear things like, well, I didn't know the answer, so I needed to go to my mentor, I needed to go to my sponsor, I needed to get help, I needed to look here, you can kind of figure out where people have that desire to want to learn further, rather than, well, I knew all the answers and I figured out all about myself and I'm fantastic. But they kind of showcase where they leaned on people and where they, or some people, I didn't know the answer and I didn't figure it out, but it's a lesson learned and now I know for next time. So they're showing that, going back to the EQ as well, they're showing that awareness of being able to learn from those mistakes and then translate that into moving forward and to being successful the next time they move forward. So I think it's just that, having your ear a little tuned to it and then just fleshing that out a little bit through the questions.
Yeah, it strikes me, having had a bunch of these conversations recently, how important it is for candidates to prepare, obviously, for an interview, but to have really thought about like what they've done in the last few years, write stuff out so you can kind of get it clear in your head. Like for me, if you asked me what was a project I did, I don't know, 2 years ago, I would not be able to remember. If I went for an interview now, I'd be in absolute shambles because I'd be all over the place without being able to have a coherent narrative and explanation. So I feel like there's such a big win to just sitting down there thinking, writing, documenting, just getting everything set. Because if not, I could say you could get into an interview and it's not that you didn't do the things, it's just that you couldn't articulate them easily.
100%. And something even I'm kicking myself for not doing more regularly is actually making a list. Every 3 months, I really should have sat down and gone, okay, what did I achieve this quarter? And so sometimes I have to go back and look at my presentations and things to remind myself of all the things I've done. So I think if I could go back 18 months, I would tell myself, or, anyone, like just jot down your achievements, jot down the work you were doing, because it may not seem like a big deal to you, but when you articulate this to someone else, oh wow, you worked on that project, you achieved that business case, you were successful in closing that deal. All these little things add up. So I think that's a very good point, and it's something I need to get better at myself, because you're right. When the time comes to interview, you want to have that list of all the great things you've done and to be able to explain it in a really clear way to people.
Yes. I wonder if a bit of ChatGPT could help with this. Like if I were trying to do this now, I'd be like, oh, where's all the data that's tracked everything I've done for 6 years? Like my emails, Slack, Jira, HubSpot. I'd be like, export, summarize ChatGPT. What the hell have I done for 6 years? Give me my top 5 achievements.
That's a great idea. I might try that after this call. Just go and export everything into ChatGPT and see what it says.
That is maybe a nice segue onto AI. The most buzzed, hyped 2 letters of the English or Latin alphabet ever, for sure. Some of it probably justified, some of it maybe not. I'd love to get your views on AI in the hiring context, like the sort of lay of the land of what you've seen so far. Love to hear what SAP have also, like what what avenue they're going down as well.
Yeah. So obviously with SAP, AI is now embedded into all the solutions. So HR was actually the first suite to have AI embedded, and we started rolling that out. So we had a number of use cases where, AI was being tested and used in customers. And we were actually very quick to market with it, but we at the same time we were very, very careful when we were doing it. And I remember I became very close with the head of AI for SuccessFactors, who was the global lead, and she was teaching me we have to be very careful because there are so many biases that can come into the program, especially when we're talking about HR. So we need to be very sure that if we're using AI in our suite, it doesn't come with biases. It doesn't come with hallucinations. We need to be very responsible about how we're going about this. So I really liked the approach that we took, because I think the reality is, if we're talking about using AI for hiring, I think anyone who's applied for a job on LinkedIn, you do the easy apply button or you put your resume through. The AI robots now that are scanning resumes, and the amount of, rejections that people just get because you don't have enough keywords or you don't have enough things in the resume that are standing out with the job spec, it's difficult. So I think, maybe separating the two things. So really exciting what SuccessFactors is doing on the AI side. It's obviously a lot deeper than just, scanning resumes. It goes right into the solution on all parts, whether it be skills ontology, whether it be, writing job descriptions, payroll, etc. But on the AI side for hiring, I think we still have a long way to go, because it is a little bit scary. A very competent person can be putting their resume through and it doesn't even see the light of day. It doesn't see a recruiter because, it just didn't meet those keywords that AI was wanting to see. So I think it is great. It's going to be great, but I think we cannot rely on it yet. We still have work to do in that space. And, people still kind of want to feel like someone is looking at their resume. And if you're not right for that job, maybe you'd be right for another job coming up, but you never get that opportunity because it doesn't even make it that far. So, I'd even be curious to hear your view and what other people are saying on the topic, but that's my view at the moment.
Yeah, if I were to summarize the conversations I've had in the past 4 months, I'd say very few companies are really using it at any level of scale, certainly for like the core selection of a candidate. So where there has been some use so far of what I've seen is more like skunk work projects, where an analytics leader or an engineering leader has kind of built out their own little pipeline with Claude or ChatGPT kind of behind the scenes to do their own little thing. Whereas from most of the talent leaders I've spoken to, yeah, they're kind of dabbling with some use cases like they're writing the job descriptions, AI summaries of interviews, but not really, hey, I've got these 1,000 candidates, who are the 10 I should interview? Or I've interviewed these 10 candidates, who's the one I should hire? The core selection process, I don't think has not touched AI yet much. I think the candidates seem to be using it a lot more to write the resume, to do the automatic applications, to help with interview prep, some cases also in the interview itself. I feel like probably a bit of fear mongering there. Like, I don't think the average candidate is also using ChatGPT at the same time as trying to do the interview themselves. So it's more like the preparatory work. But I personally feel like our expectations and the standards we're holding AI to are maybe extraordinarily high compared to how we hold humans, in the sense that the way recruitment's currently done is so biased anyway, the way humans do it. To give you an interesting stat of a study here in Australia that Sydney Uni did a few years ago, they applied to thousands of different roles around Sydney and Melbourne with different buckets of resumes, with the only difference among the buckets of resumes just being the names. So they're trying to test, is there some kind of bias against people from certain countries? They specifically tested Chinese sounding names versus Anglo-Saxon sounding names. To cut a long story short, they found that if you applied for a job in Australia with a Chinese name, your odds of a callback were only 1/3 that of an Anglo-Saxon name, all else equal. and this is 3 years ago, I think, so it would have been completely human-driven screening. And I've seen similar kind of studies in other markets testing different subpopulations. And so if that's the base case of how rife bias is, it's hard for me to imagine anything other than a disastrous implementation of AI being worse than that. You see what I mean? So I feel like maybe we're comparing AI to some idealized hiring world that doesn't exist, as opposed to the current world, which is so flawed and tedious and slow and manual and biased.
Yeah, that's very good point. And yeah, that's very interesting. And I think that kind of just goes back to why, we spent so much time when we were building out the product to make sure that, those biases were not accidentally, and I use the word accidentally because, they can build out over time without meaning to, be in the product, because that's not what it was designed for. That's not what we're trying to achieve. We're not trying to, we're trying to make the world better through the use of technology. So we have to be very careful and responsible about how we do that, because people will start to rely on it completely. So it's really important to get it right now.
Yeah, I agree completely. And maybe it is right that we just have higher standards because then we'll move the needle, we'll make the new solution better than the current one. Um, and I can also see easily how things could go awry, because it could be a scenario of like, oh, hey, we want to implement, I don't know, resume screening in our company. Cool. Where's our training data? Oh, let's look at all the resumes we've screened previously and just redo what we're currently doing. If that's the approach, that is bound to just magnify any existing biases that are in place in that particular company. So yeah, I could see how it could get derailed pretty quickly if it's not done right.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Tricky space, but exciting.
It is exciting because I just see so much upside. Also, again, if done right, even something as simple as the interview itself. Like I remember when we were doing interview research only 2 years ago, speaking to hiring managers about how they conducted interviews, 20% would take notes on paper with a pen. Another 40% use some other tool like a spreadsheet or a Trello board. And it's like all this data is just all over the shop. Like what I found so interesting is how often there's a disconnect between what the hiring teams are doing versus what the talent and HR teams are doing. And often the HR tech is not necessarily used consistently across the whole company. And so, yeah, anywhere we have to then even just record the interviews, have them transcribed, have them summarized. Imagine being able to search over every interview you've ever done for years, matching candidates and all this kind of stuff. Like there's just such huge upside, I think, for doing this well.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think uniformity and processes throughout interviewing is so important. And you're so right, because, even again, speaking from my own experience, sometimes I'll be on the road, right? So I'm just taking quick notes here, or I'm just writing in my notebook. And sometimes I get sent a spreadsheet and I use the spreadsheet, but it's not always the same. So, is that always the right process? Probably not. I'm going to go with no. So, having that uniform way of interviewing, whether it be questions, the scoring, the commentary, even the debrief with a panel. Sometimes it's just down to, okay, I want to respect this person's decision. So, okay, fine. They went in that direction. We'll go with them. So yeah, it's a very good point, and something I think every organization can do a review of, do we really have the interview process down perfect? And I'd argue there's a lot of room for improvement everywhere.
Yeah, 100%. And again, from my experience interviewing, you'll often do them in batches. So you might have, I don't know, 3, 4, 5 interviews a day. If I don't record notes in or immediately after that interview, honestly, I've forgotten who that person is by the end of the day. Like if you have 10 different meetings, you're like, who's this candidate again? Like, what were they about? And so just has to be some way to capture the data in real time at some level, even if it's because I get some people's hesitation to have an AI doing scoring or whatever. But if at the moment the choice is there's no summary, there's no notes, there's no data at all, surely an AI summary, even if it's imperfect, even if it's biased, is going to be better than data just evaporating into thin air.
Yeah, I'd agree. And it's not the deciding factor, but it at least helps remind you of, what stood out about the candidate, where some concerns were, and you could follow up on that yourself. But no, I completely agree. I think it could be very helpful in that respect. And the candidates also deserve it, right? You put a lot of work into an interview, and they deserve for us to take the right notes and remember what they said and get back to them in a timely manner and give them feedback, if they weren't successful. So yeah, I completely agree.
Yes, and this comes to another bit of pushback I would often hear in talent circles around the use of technology in hiring, where there's sometimes almost the starting assumption is it's dehumanizing, whereas I view it very differently. Obviously very biased in this regard, but what could be more dehumanizing than a process that has no technology, that's so manual that stuff slips through the cracks all the time, and some poor TA is trying to chase around all this manual paper trail in emails and this and this and this, and then that's how candidates get ghosted. That's how you're late on feedback. So surely anything that enables that and makes it easier is actually going to be better for the candidate, more humanizing rather than dehumanizing.
Yes, I completely agree. The number one, when I talk to my friends, colleagues, my husband, whoever, the number one thing is the candidate experience. And I think every single organization is guilty of not doing the best they can on getting back to candidates, in a timely manner, giving them feedback, just keeping them in the loop, right? Like, okay, there's a hiring freeze going on. Let's just tell them, hey, it's nothing to do with you. We just had to freeze the process because we've got our internal stuff going on. You were great, but we'll get back to you. Every little step that we can do along the way just makes such a difference to a candidate. And, I keep thinking about, we don't want people to start their first day, without the best impression, with a bad taste in their mouth. You want them to be coming in, having the whole process, feel really supported and welcoming and streamlined. Because, if someone doesn't want to work for an organization where they can't even get the the hiring process, kind of in a streamlined way, they're probably thinking, oh gosh, what's it like once I actually get in there? Which may not be the case at all, but it's just, you naturally are going to be thinking about those things. So I think that is a very big area of improvement across the board, that everyone can do better in. So, it's something that I think about a lot and try to, actively make an effort to, even if I have to just get the candidate's WhatsApp number and just send them a message. Hey, look, I'm really sorry. It's taking longer than expected, but we've just got some internal stuff happening, and we'll let you know. I think that goes a long way.
It really does. What do they say? No news is still news. That's an acceptable update.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. They just want to just be reassured that, they're still in the process, or whatever is going on has maybe nothing to do with them. Because it's nerve-wracking out there, right? Like I said, people put a lot of effort into interviews, so I think that needs to be, respected. And at the end of the day, you're trying to convince people to work for your organization, right? You want to put your best foot forward as much as they're trying to put their best foot forward. So I think we always have to remember that as we go through the process.
Yes. And I have detected over the past couple of years, maybe in particular, increasing distrust in recruitment, arguably on both sides, probably exacerbated by AI at some level, where companies, it's like, well, is this candidate who they say they are? Are they taking the test themselves, or are they getting ChatGPT? Does this person have an avatar when I'm doing an interview with them? And then the candidate's like, well, is this job real? It's a fake job. The posting hasn't been pulled down. The role's being pulled. I haven't heard back. Like, there's just a lot of annoyance and distrust on both sides, which is hard to recover, I think, from that position.
Agree. And yeah, we have to work really hard to overcome some of those things. Like, even people thinking, okay, are they just posting it because they have to post on LinkedIn, but they had no intention of going, with anyone external. There's all these things that are running through your mind, when you're, out there looking for a role. And that can be really difficult if there isn't that, communication coming from, the talent acquisition team, because they're your first point of contact with an organization. So, you really want that to be a positive experience, for candidates, so that, whether they're successful or not, or maybe they'll reconsider coming back and applying for another role, you want them to feel that good experience.
Yes, and the worst thing would be somehow turning someone as, let's say, a neutral into a detractor. Like if the process is actually that bad that they put off your entire brand by that. That's probably going to be rare, but I don't know. If I applied for a job nowadays and I did an interview and never heard back at all, I'd be pretty annoyed.
Yes. Yes, I would too.
In fact, I can remember vividly now one job I went for. I, of course, won't name the company. This is, I don't know, 10 years ago now. I'm not still bitter about it, but I will mention it. Is the founder basically said, hey, 99% of the way there, I definitely want to hire you. Just come in and have a chat to my MD, like his business partner. And drove all the way up to Sydney. It's like a 5-hour round trip. Had a chat to him in his office, 10 minutes max. We didn't even talk about work. We spoke about, I remember, Tottenham Hotspur and football. So maybe he was like an Arsenal fan or vice versa. I don't know. Maybe I rubbed him up the wrong way, but I did not get that job and I still don't know why. So frustrating. And I can remember this company 10 years later.
Yeah. Yeah. And that, you made that effort and you did all the right things, and then you never got feedback. I mean, it's not a good feeling. It doesn't help you learn. You don't know what you could have improved on. Maybe they had someone else the whole time and you were just a tick box in the process. It's important to get that feedback for sure.
Yeah, exactly. Because otherwise you just don't know. Especially it's probably hard at the application stage, isn't it? Because most of the time you get at best a kind of generic rejection email back, maybe a few weeks after you've applied. But what are you meant to do? Was there something wrong with the way you pitched yourself? Were you not right for the role? You kind of just left wondering, aren't you?
That's right. That's right. And I would love to see some of the unsuccessful applicants, because maybe they'd be right for a future role. And building your talent pipeline when you are not hiring is so important. And that's probably another thing I think that organizations and I take responsibility for that, don't always think about enough, because you get so busy in day to day. And then when a role comes up, you think, oh gosh, okay, let's start looking at who's in the market and who would be suitable for this role. But if you were, more efficient and smarter about it, you'd already have, an entire talent pipeline ready to go. Hey, look, I remember interviewing this girl. She was fantastic. Didn't work out for the marketing role, but she'd be fantastic for a demand generation role. And, you kind of already have these nurtured candidates who have had a positive experience with you. They still want to work for the organization. And it makes the hiring process easier because you already have that pipeline ready to go. You've got a much, broader pool of candidates that you maybe would if you had those 2 weeks to just go out and get whoever you could. So I do think that nurturing of the talent pipeline is so critical to avoid those situations.
I wonder if one of the unlocks here would be then, again, systems where there's like a very comprehensive collection of data, where every interview has been recorded, they've been scored perfectly. You can easily go in and search, to your point, like here's this new role. Maybe it's automatically searching across all the candidates, automatically doing outreach, getting them into the next role like that. I feel like with the right quality data, doesn't seem that complicated to do well.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, so many people now have hiring KPIs baked into their role, right? You want to hire faster. You want to make sure you have bubbles on seats as quickly as possible. Well, that becomes a lot easier if, to your point, you already have this repository of people and skills and information on candidates that you can easily go to. And yeah, I love that idea, having essentially a folder of all these candidates and being able to go through and quickly search and see who would meet the requirements of roles coming up.
Yep, I don't think we should be that far off something like that. So you mentioned, talent pipelining and needing to improve that. If you think holistically over the past kind of 10 years with the customers you've worked with, are there any recurring hiring process challenges that you saw, things that companies need to do better on?
I think skills is the number one thing that customers always talk to us about. Not having the right skills internally, or then if they're trying to hire for a role externally, finding those people with those right skills. And one of the interesting things as we're building out our skills ontology with SuccessFactors is skills, not everyone uses the same words, right? For skills. And so being able to take someone's resume who has listed a set of skills and then being able to translate that into understanding, and put it in our terminology, or the customer's, more importantly, terminology. If we're talking Coca-Cola, if we're talking, a big manufacturing company, they're going to use different words. So helping them make that hiring process much easier on the skill side, I know was a number one thing. And then, of course, skilling internally. They were customers are always looking for ways to be able to upskill, their employees more effectively, faster, with changing times in technology, with changing times in their industries. So that was another big thing that we, really help them keep on top of, so that whether they're hiring, promoting internally, jobs are changing. They had to be able to adapt to those changing jobs, especially as things like AI come into the fold. So those are really the main those are two of the big main topics that that customers were looking at, and that's going to keep going. The skills life journey is never ending. So being able to constantly help customers stay on top of that is really critical.
Yes. And if I, again, think back to all the conversations I've had with guests, probably the number one thing they said that they're looking for in candidates is that adaptability, willingness, and ability to learn new things. Maybe because technology is changing so quickly, really a skill set from 5 years ago, maybe not redundant is a bit of a stretch, but I guess it's changing faster than any time in history, the skills that are needed.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's evolving faster than I've ever seen it, evolve before. And I think it's going to continue that way. Um, I was late in hearing this quote, but I heard the, Sam Altman quote. It's AI is not going to replace jobs, but it's people who don't understand AI that would be replaced. And I'm maybe paraphrasing a little bit, or I butchered it a bit, but it's interesting. Like yeah, it makes sense. It's, having to just keep up to date with the evolution of what skills look like in, today and in the future. My dad just went and did his master's in AI because he just felt at 60 something, I won't give away his age, years old, he was like, I need to be on the forefront of this. I need to understand, what's happening. And that's, I think, the reality of what we're doing. And so many organizations now, especially in technology, are offering great programs for AI, and there's so many resources available. It's not just about AI, but just resources that we have at our fingertips now through AI. Actually, we can really learn so much more. I think it's exciting, and it's something that's beneficial to everyone. So
Even in day-to-day life, actually, I found ChatGPT and Claude are just great language tutors. You can just speak to them in Spanish, Italian, Russian, whatever. I use it sometimes to take like a picture of a book, and I've underlined the words I don't know, and I say, give me a quiz for these words, put them into a sentence, give me like a mnemonic, like an easy way to remember a particular word, just on the spot comes up with that. And it's free, effectively. That is pretty staggering, no?
yeah, it's amazing. The amount of questions I'm putting into my Perplexity app every single day it's just it's astounding, and it's just giving me so much information, and it also tells me the sources, which I really like. So you're kind of trusting where the information's coming from. Yeah, there's really no excuse for not teaching ourselves, even just day to day in our house, and learning new things, for sure.
I even got ChatGPT to help me out with the plants in the background there. One of them was a little bit sick, and I was repotting it, and the soil looked a bit funky. I did like the video mode. It straight away said, oh, it's a fungus. You need to do X, Y, and Z. Bang, Bob's your uncle.
That's a great tip. I have a plant that's dying outside, a brand new tree I just bought. I'm going to need to do that and bring it back to life.
You find yourself using Perplexity more now than even Google? Is that like your standard search engine?
100%. Everything is going into Perplexity. I don't even bother with Google, to be honest. Whether it's a cooking recipe or whether it's just any question I have, I am constantly using Perplexity, to the point where I'm like, I should probably use my brain a little bit more, maybe like try and search out some stuff, but it's just so easy. It's there at your fingertips.
Yeah. Is that the danger? Like, are we offloading too much of the thought process to AI, or does it just solve all these tedious problems for us, and we're going to our magical brains are going to focus on bigger issues. I don't know. What do you reckon?
Potential will be, unlocked because we're not focusing on these mundane tasks. I mean, yeah, that's the hopefully the benefit of it. I know, especially when we were building out with SuccessFactors, it was like, okay, let's take away the not sexy, the very boring tasks for people. Let's make that so much easier so that you can focus on more strategic things. And that's the hope. That's the goal.
And I feel like there's going to have to be a mindset shift then with people. Like, for example, for software engineers, sometimes they call themselves coders, right? And so if your whole identity is based on your job for a lot of people, and then their job is literally the name of the task that now the large language model is going to do instead of them, there's going to have to be some shift to say, well, I'm not a coder, I'm a product developer, or I solve customers' problems, or whatever. There's going to be some evolution, because if we're sort of stuck at a task level in the way we think about ourselves, and that task is now done automatically, then we'd be left with a identity crisis potentially.
Yeah, that's right. And that's where the human element comes back into it. So, when leading a team, obviously, then you need to go back and work with your employees to say, okay, we're going to have to go on the journey together. We need to, make this transition. Some people will be open to it, some people will not. And, how do we just bring people along for the journey and understand that this, becoming a product manager as opposed to a coder, I mean, for me, that sounds so much more exciting because you can talk to customers, you can go out there and see what they really need. You can see how the product should be fixed. You get to have an input on that. You get to say, like me, it's easy for me to say it. Oh, that sounds fantastic. But someone who's, wanting to be a coder their whole life and that's what they love to do, making that transition, going down in front of customers, that could be really scary. I don't want to do that. I don't want to speak to people. I want to sit and do what I'm doing. So that's where the human part of it comes in. And that's not something AI can help us with. We need to go back to our, leadership skills and have that empathy for the team and work through that.
I wonder if, because the shift and the technology has been so vast and quick, that surely anyone who's not been living under a rock can see, wow, this is a pretty substantial shift. Like, you'd have to be incredibly stubborn to completely refuse AI. Like, I haven't met anyone who hasn't at least dabbled a little bit. Maybe that's to their advantage then, that it's easier to come along when it's so much hype and reality at the same time.
I think so. I think it's, it's in everyone's faces every day now, and you can go and use it at your fingertips. So you can start to understand what it means for you in day-to-day life. So yeah, I agree. I think everyone now is faced with the reality that this is something we need to learn more about. You don't need to know how it works in detail. And that was one of the things I used to say to my customers, you don't need to know how AI works. Like, no one probably should. It's how does it work for you? How do you use it? Let's not get bogged down in the technical side necessarily. Of course, it's important if you're talking in technical teams, but if you're talking to a CHRO or, whoever. And yeah, so I think it's a new reality we all need to get used to. I don't even think I'm using it as much as I could. The fact that you're using it for plans, I didn't even think of that. So now it's unlimited what we can start using it for in our lives.
It is, exactly. It's unlimited. You're limited by your imagination only, really. And also, yeah, just because it's changing so quickly, things that you might have tried a year ago, which is like, oh, well, that's crap, and now are absolutely in play, because the development is so fast.
Definitely. I mean, my husband even used it to write our wedding vows, which I don't know how I feel about that, but not something I thought of. But he's using it. He's taking advantage of while it's there. It's great. So there you go.
Okay, so I don't feel so bad now, because I sent a gift to my friend who just had a baby, and I'd written the note on it, but I'd asked ChatGPT after I'd written it, I'm like, can you give me some feedback, like tidy it up a little bit? And so I did edit it slightly, and I thought, oh, does that make it somehow less mine? But the end outcome is all that matters, I guess.
Hey, working smarter, not harder. It's okay.
Ali, if you could ask our next guest any question about hiring, what would you ask them?
Oh, that's a good question. I think I would be curious to see people's perspectives on a couple things, actually. Maybe the external versus internal, hiring, how they see that differently. How they maybe are they open as I am to kind of looking externally. And while I 100% believe in promoting internally, nurturing your talent, that's without question. But, having that external lens as well, I'm curious if that's something, others in the market see as well. And I think the other big topic we spoke about that, I would assume most people can agree on is how would you also go about improving the hiring process? So back to our conversation of getting back to candidates in a timely manner, having interviews in a more uniform way, feedback being recorded, all those sorts of things. How do we almost create like an industry better standard for people moving forward? I'd love to hear other perspectives on that and band together to see how we can improve some of those things.
They are some great questions, which I'll level at the next couple of guests next week, and really interested to hear what they say. Ali, it's been a great conversation today. Very easy, very smooth. You've offered us some great insights and some great wisdom. So thank you so much for joining us.
No worries. Thanks so much for having me.